Skull Island is the home of Titanus Kong and a host of other creatures like the skull crawlers, the Skur Buffalo, and the Mire Squid. However, with the events of Godzilla vs. Kong, we learn that something has happened to the island, rendering it unstable. But after reading the novel for Godzilla vs. Kong, along with the prequel comic Kingdom Kong, I now have some insight as to what's going on here. Now there will be spoilers of course for both Godzilla vs. Kong and Kingdom Kong, but if you're curious as to the fate of Skull Island, then stick around. In Godzilla vs. Kong, we learn that Monarch, under the care of Dr. Andrews, has placed Kong into an enormous dome-like facility on the island itself. For some reason, a storm now envelops the island, causing massive damage, with much of the island eventually flooding. This Monarch-built dome would be the only place a Titan like Kong could now survive, but it won't sustain him for long at this size. They wonder how long they can keep him on the island, and how long the dome can resist the outside storm. Dr. Andrews knows that if Kong is moved off of the island, Godzilla will see him as a threat and attack him, and she's worried that he wouldn't be able to defend himself, especially since she knows that Kong bows to no one. And unfortunately, that's about all that we know about the fate of the island from the film, just that a storm, possibly even the one surrounding it, has now moved inland and is flooding the island. So now let's look to the prequel comic to find out more about the fate of the island. Now, Houston Brooks is well known for his thesis on the existence of the Hollow Earth. He proved the theory right on Skull Island back in the 1970s and still works with Monarch today. Fast forward to Kingdom Kong, and by following Brooks, we can learn a lot about the fate of the island. As it turns out, a few years back, Brooks was in China when a superstorm was seen over the Pacific like nothing on record. As far as they could tell, it began right after Ghidorah fled Mexico, a gift from the devil to remember him by. It was packing wind speeds of 400 miles per hour and air pressure so dense that it was triggering new cyclones every 5 minutes. It even had water spouts that reached down to the seafloor. And somehow, it's been raging in the same spot for nearly 2 years. Then last week, it shifts course and heads directly for Skull Island. He then mentions that Dr. Andrews has been translating some hieroglyphs found near the vortex, where they uncover an Iwi legend about a huge storm and some kind of battle against the sun. Looking ahead in the comic, and they are now on the island to drill into the Hollow Earth, and we pick back up with Houston, where he's theorizing about that storm and seismic activity that seemed to coincide with it. He then notes that the first seismic activity, the first in years mind you, happened, and then a day later, that superstorm started to move. He thought that they were connected, but wasn't sure how. Now, as the reader, I'm starting to wonder if Camazotz somehow has the ability to control the storm, or does the Titan merely sense that the storm will be changing its path soon and is preparing its exit from the Hollow Earth? Well, let's read on. The comic then goes on to mention other Iwi legends and phrases, one that reads, "The King of the Deep, eternal enemy of the sun who seeks to rule an endless night," and another that says that the darkness will swallow the world and the King of the Deep will rise, and the sun will die on his tongue. Now these mentions to me link Camazotz right to the darkness that the island is suffering through. After all, Camazotz is a blind titan that fears the light, so making the island dark would allow for it to challenge Kong for his alpha title. But unfortunately, that's all Kingdom Kong has to say on the fate of Skull Island. We find out that the storm, a leftover from Ghidorah, has merged with Skull Island's storm. But it's left in the air here if the storm was simply moved to the island by coincidence or by Camazotz. However, after reading the Godzilla vs. Kong novel, written by Greg Keyes, who also happened to write Godzilla Dominion, Godzilla's prequel comic that came out alongside Kingdom Kong, we learn that Camazotz was the one who called in the storm. In the novel, they thought that the storm was caused by the widespread environmental destruction wrought by Ghidorah, perhaps also linked to climate change. But in blasting the caverns beneath Skull Island, wide enough for planes to go through, they had inadvertently released Camazotz, a bat-like titan who apparently had called the storm to shield it from the sunlight that it abhorred. Now Kong and the pilots do defeat Camazotz, but the vortex has now been destabilized. And even worse, Camazotz had drawn the Tempest ashore and sustained it there. although we find out a page later from Nathan Lynn that it would be the vortex itself that anchored the storm to the island, where it would rage on indefinitely. So Skull Island is pretty much wiped out. It's been mostly flooded, with only some areas still above water. The iwi are gone, and creatures from below came up during the torrents and ate everything that they could. Now the book does mention that something may likely survive there, but it won't be anything that once thrived on Skull Island. Now looking back, the vortex here proved to be unstable for travel, killing Lynn's brother in a failed mission, causing them to use the Antarctic vortex, a much more stable entrance. So with Skull Island pretty much gone now, Kong's new home is now in the Hollow Earth. I do have to admit that I kinda wish we got to see Kong live in the jungles or forests on some other continent, but I also admit that he is a perfect vehicle to explore the Hollow Earth with. So what are you guys' thoughts on the fate of Skull Island? Let's discuss below, and as always guys, take care, thanks for watching, and I hope to see you next time.